Light up the smoking implement of your choice, because we're about to dig into the summer of love. Far out, man. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Fantasia. Welcome to Thumb Together, and today we're going to be talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood together. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. If I don't get enough likes, the hippies will come after me and take my soul. Because apparently that's a thing that they do. Tarantino's last few films now have been less about fantasy crime, in the modern era, and more about what-if stories, satisfying what-if stories throughout history. We had what if a slave on a plantation got some other slaves together and fought back and just beat the shit out of all the slavers? What if there was a group of Jewish soldiers who somehow found a way to infiltrate the ranks of the German army and beat the shit out of Nazi high command? And here we have another historical tragedy that ends in a fictitious way with the question, what if the Manson family hippies who went to kill Sharon Tate and her friends got the shit beat out of them by some actors and stuntmen who just were in the right place at the right time? And there you have it. There's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I kind of just spoiled the ending for you, but I think that's the point of this movie. You kind of knew going into Inglourious Basterds that it was going to be about some folks who killed Nazis. You sort of need to know going into it that it's going to revolve around this particular tragedy and then flip it on its head the way Tarantino movies do. Now, with this film taking place in 1969, that puts it right smack dab in that sweet spot in the history of Hollywood that Tarantino himself is obsessed with. Watch any Tarantino movie and you see the allusions, you see the homages to film of this era. He is in love with this era of Hollywood. What I was sort of expecting was a bigger love letter to that, a bigger celebration to that, and you don't get that in this. This is not, in fact, a huge love letter to that era of cinema. This isn't Tarantino saying, I love all these things, look at all these things that I love. I think that took a lot of restraint, because I'm sure Tarantino would have loved to pack this movie with like 5 hours of just old school 60s Hollywood references. So I'm not upset that it wasn't a love letter. I'm actually kind of impressed. I'm impressed that he was restrainful enough on himself to be like, no, we're going to focus on this plot and on these characters. And yes, we'll throw in little chunks of like referential humor for people who know the era, and those are some of the funniest moments, but they're few and far between. And considering this is a long movie, that should stress just how few of them there are. They're very scattered and very quick. Instead, Tarantino puts his full focus on the two main characters of Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton, and on the secondary character of Sharon Tate, played by Margot Robbie. And Sharon Tate, of these three main protagonists, is the only person who was actually a real life individual. She existed back in the day. The other two are just creations of Tarantino. And he sort of spends the whole movie creating this plot that puts these two characters in her orbit without them ever really interacting with each other. Now, the thing about Sharon Tate is she was a real life victim of the Manson family. She was infamously murdered in August 1969 in her home, along with her friends, by the hippies who were under the spell of Charles Manson. And that's, I think, where the movie's biggest weakness comes in. And it's not necessarily a weakness per se, but the biggest thing that might stand in its way of more people loving it. And it's this. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is super 100% inside baseball when it comes to the murder of Sharon Tate. It is completely inside baseball, to the point where, as somebody who did not know about Sharon Tate's murder, as somebody who did not know this story, there's a lot that was just lost on me. Tarantino obviously is very familiar with the story. He's very familiar with the life of Sharon Tate and her relationship with Roman Polanski and everything that was going on there. And in the film, he makes a big deal of subtly showing things that have to do with the murders. For example, Sharon Tate lived on a street called Cielo Drive. I didn't know that. Unless you're super familiar with this story, you probably didn't know that either. Now, Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, fictitious character, also happens to live on Cielo Drive, right next door, in fact. So there's a scene early on in the movie where Leo is driving to his house and he pulls into his street, and the camera slowly pans up to a street sign saying Cielo Drive, and it lingers there, and the shot is very ominous and frightening. And not knowing anything about this story, I'm just like, there's a street sign. Why is that scary? Like, why is Quentin showing us a street sign and telling us through, this visual art to, like, be afraid? Ooh, look, Cielo Drive. I'm just like, what does that mean? Like, is that just like a Hollywood thing? Like, oh, Hollywood people know this street. It's a famous street. Same thing happens towards the end of the movie when we get to the night of the murder itself. On that night, Sharon Tate and her friends famously went to go eat dinner at a Mexican restaurant called El Coyote. Again, when that night was being set up in the film, we have these shots of Hollywood Boulevard or whatever, and all these shops turning their lights on and these restaurants turning their lights on as day turns into night. And when we get to the sign for the restaurant El Coyote, it lingers there. And it's scary and it's moody, and the camera slowly pans over the top of the sign and down onto the street. And I'm just like, I guess El Coyote's a big deal, but I don't know why. That's what I mean by inside baseball. Unless you are super well versed in not just Los Angeles itself and Los Angeles lore, but in the story of Charles Manson and in the murder, particularly of Sharon Tate, by Manson's homies, you're going to be completely lost. See, I didn't know about Sharon Tate at all. I didn't know she existed, she was murdered, nothing. I had no idea who she was before I went to this movie. I did know who Charles Manson was, but the movie surprisingly does not put a whole lot of focus on Charles. The trailer did. When I saw the trailer, I was like, oh, cool. They're going to talk about Charles Manson, because the trailer showed him and it showed like his commune of hippies and whatnot. But the movie has one scene with Charles in it where you barely see his face. Throughout the movie, the hippies only refer to him as Charlie, and other than that one scene, he's absent the entire time. So I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of somebody who's just a casual movie fan and just a casual Los Angeles pop culture fan who heard of Charles Manson and the Manson family, but that's it. They just know, oh yeah, there was a serial killer named Charles Manson and he had a family of killers with him. I'm trying to put myself in that mindset, okay? The average casual viewer. And if that average casual viewer walked into this film, there's so little reference to Manson himself that I think that unless they knew ahead of time that this was going to be about that particular topic, it would go completely over their head. Because again, they never say the word Manson. They never even call him Charles. They only call him Charlie. The guy who plays him looks a lot like him, but you see him for like literally that amount of time and then he's gone. That's something that I think would completely wash over people, and they wouldn't appreciate the ending because of that. Because the ending, like Inglourious Basterds, like Django Unchained, takes this tragic moment in history where innocent people were hurt by very bad people and said, you know what, we're going to change that just for fun because this is fiction, and we're going to keep those innocent people safe, and we're going to have our characters beat the ever-loving shit out of the very, very bad people who did these dirty deeds in real life. Everybody in the real world knows about slavery. Everybody in the real world knows about the Nazis. So everybody could walk into Django, everybody could walk into Inglourious Basterds and appreciate the catharsis of seeing those horrible people get their comeuppance, even if it is fictional. Everybody in the world probably does know about Charles Manson, but it's a little less famous, and B, so completely anonymous in this film that catharsis I don't think exists. I don't think Once Upon a Time has that sweet catharsis that the other ones had, just because of how subtle, almost non-existent, the Charles Manson stuff was. So when all was said and done, for me at least, that put Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a few notches lower than some of Tarantino's other work. It made me wish that I was super obsessed about the murder of Sharon Tate, because if I was, I feel like I would have loved this movie. I feel like every 20 seconds I would have been like, oh my god, Cielo Drive! And I would have been like geeking out. But again, it's so inside baseball. The catharsis that we're supposed to feel at the end is just not there. It's just like, okay, that was fun, and that's it. I would have to put this lower on the totem pole of his movies. I would put this maybe with like Pulp Fiction where it's like, yeah, it's just a fun movie with a smorgasbord of different characters doing random things. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's violent, sometimes it's both. And then it ends, and you're just like, well, that was pointless, but I had a great time with the pointlessness. The characters of Rick Dalton and Clint Booth, though, are two main heroes. Those guys were so much fun to watch, and just their interactions. They had this great bromance that just made the movie that much more enjoyable. Every time they were on screen together, which actually wasn't a whole lot. A lot of times they were separate, but whenever they were sharing a scene together, those were the best moments of the film for me. They played off each other really well. Their friendship was really believable. Apparently Tarantino wrote like a whole backstory of their friendship that you don't see, and he gave it to them, and he's like, here's your backstory. That hard work, it shows, because their friendship is great in the film. And guys, this poster. Let's give some love to this poster. The posters in this movie are classic 60s era posters, hand-drawn, and you know me, I love hand-drawn posters so much. Bring them back, Hollywood. Seriously, screw Photoshop, screw your stupid Photoshop floating heads, bring back hand-drawn posters, please. Anyway, that is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If you like old Hollywood, you'll get a kick out of it. If you like Tarantino, you'll get a kick out of it. But if you really, really like the trivia and minutia of the murder of Sharon Tate or of the goings and comings of the Manson family, then you are going to be like a kid in a candy store. I'm Andrew Fantasia. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you here next time, and until then, adios.